Long ago in a distant land, I, Aku, the shape-shifting master of darkness, unleashed an unspeakable evil. But a foolish samurai warrior wielding a magic sword stepped forth to oppose me. Before the final blow was struck, I tore open a portal in time and flung him into the future, where my evil is law. Now the fool seeks to return to the past and undo the future that is Aku.
This is Beers, Burgers, and a Movie. I am Connor with Joey.
Hello.
And Mark.
Hi.
And I guess this is a movie, really, because we saw Samurai Jack, the movie premiere event, or the premiere movie event. Is that what they're calling it?
Something like that. Fathom events type of deal.
Yeah. So Samurai Jack, the show from 2001, I believe, was when it first came out, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
We're all back from the dead to review something that is very, very barely considered a movie.
The first 3 episodes of Samurai Jack that were made in 2001 were made all together to be, played all at once.
Yeah, ultimately it is a TV show, but it does play very well on a theater screen.
And that goes, we'll talk more about it.
And it was created by Genndy Tartakovsky, who is best known for, other than Samurai Jack, Dexter's Lab, The Powerpuff Girls, and most recently the shameless Adam Sandler projects Hotel Transylvania. He is the director on them, but, he really...
I was hoping you would mention Hotel Transylvania.
His most acclaimed project.
He has to get paid somehow. Joey, why don't you explain why we're able to talk about Samurai Jack being in a movie theater yesterday?
And never again, as far as we know. So if you've listened to this podcast hoping that you can see Samurai Jack in theaters, well, you missed your chance.
Kind of over.
But you will have the opportunity to see Samurai Jack now in very many other home video formats. So if you like what you hear here, I highly encourage you to check it out. So Samurai Jack, we all know, was a TV series that ran on Cartoon Network by Genndy Tartakovsky. It was a very well-received critically show that never really found an audience, or at least not a wide audience. And in the 4-season run that it had, they kept changing the time slot, kept trying to find the perfect place to put it among the other programming, but nothing really fit. And after a while, the 4 seasons were over, the show just kind of fizzled out and never really concluded. All of the fans of the show for more than a decade at that point kept asking Genndy, when are you going to make the ending? And he had always wanted to do something with it because he was so proud of the project and thought that, there was potential for a really good story to conclude the series. And finally, after many false starts of trying to get a movie project off the ground, they made this 5th season of Samurai Jack, which you might have heard of. It just finished relatively recently, earlier this year. And that's sort of created this revitalized interest in Samurai Jack. You can tell because, as Genndy has said, the original ratings for Samurai Jack weren't all that high. The ratings for the 5th season on Adult Swim, where it aired, were extremely high and very, very positive. So obviously now there's some interest in Samurai Jack. And because of that, we just recently got a Blu-ray box set of the entire series released. And Today, actually, at the recording of this podcast. And yesterday, before that box set was released, they did this special event screening of the first 3 episodes of the show in theaters. So it was a special event for all fans of the show to get to see Jack in theaters. So that's what we did. I mean, all of us, I'm pretty confident, are comfortable calling themselves fans of the show, or at least people that really like it. I mean, I am one of those people that think Samurai Jack is like the top of my favorite things, film-wise, TV-wise, whatever you want to talk about. So getting to see it in the theater, somewhat of a dream come true with an asterisk at the end, and I'll get into that later. But at the same time, I mean, we're talking about Samurai Jack here, and I love it so much.
Yeah, I think it was pretty nice to be able to see something like this get, not really a theater release, but,
It's
screening at all.
What I would call the treatment that it deserves to some degree. And nothing's perfect, of course, in terms of getting a rollout, obviously. But this was a show that was not 100% super popular, back in its time. So to see it getting both this Blu-ray box set where they've remastered the entire series in HD, and to see this concluding 5th season get released and be so widely viewed, and to see this screening in theaters, it's refreshing to see like the something of high quality but not necessarily high viewership getting treated as if it had high viewership.
Mark, what is Samurai Jack?
It's a guy born in the past who gets thrown into the future and wants to find his way back to defeat the bad guy who sent him there in the first place, Aku. And it's kind of got a sort of cyberpunky sort of feel, I guess. Mm-hmm. A lot of aliens and weird things, and it's basically the way it's set up allows for almost any kind of story to be told, which is really cool, and they do some really interesting things with that. But insofar as this event goes, we see the beginning. So you see him grow up during like doing training because he got cast out of his homeland by Aku. And then you see him go back, try to defeat him, and then you get to see his first steps into the new world. Nice little character arc for him to, like, start setting off on his quest.
Right, he's the son of the Emperor of Japan.
They never say Japan, but it's obviously Japan.
Mm-hmm. And he has a sword that can defeat Aku. It's the only thing that can stop him. When he goes to finally challenge Aku, who's voiced by the legendary Mako, Aku opens a portal in time, flings him into the future, the distant future, where Aku owns everything.
He's enslaved the planet and is trying to enslave the universe.
The interesting part is that in a lot of kids' shows, the good guys always win, but in Samurai Jack, the bad guy has very firmly and completely won. And all Jack is doing is kind of, like, hanging on by a thread, going around and helping people in the world where evil has already prevailed thousands of years ago. And, like, you get a lot of, like, dark, stark, weird, spiky imagery in the show. And it's very interesting because it's pretty miserable for a kid's show, really.
That's why it never really fit in anywhere in Cartoon Network's lineup, you know? Like, Cartoon Network's lineup was always very firmly one thing or the other thing. Or basically, in other words, like, you had Adult Swim, which was your adult shows, or your, like, action-oriented anime and, like, usually more adult themes. Samurai Jack originally was not really that, so you couldn't really put it there. You couldn't really put it next to their comedy shows, because even though Samurai Jack does have a lot of elements of comedy, it's not really a comedy show. It's an action show, fundamentally. And you couldn't put it with Cartoon Network's other more, like, action-oriented stuff, like a Ben 10 type of show, because it was nothing like that. It didn't have any sort of, like, formal relationship to those shows at all.
Mm-hmm. It wasn't really a Monster of the Week kind of show.
No, not at all. Not even close.
Or even, like, the Fathom Events, like, poster, when they put a category on it, they put anime.
And that's the best they can do.
It's the close. I mean, like, that doesn't mean anything either.
Right, I don't think that fits here either. So Samurai Jack is it's like its own creature.
It's effectively like a travelogue kind of show.
What it feels like to me is more like a Clint Eastwood movie. It feels like a Western.
Yeah, like a Ronin.
Yeah.
It is a samurai movie. That's what the old style samurai movies were.
The coolest thing about Samurai Jack is that what the show was able to do with its structure and its format was, as Mark said, because the universe is this kind of like future taken over by this evil demon, essentially anything goes. Anything can be in this world and it won't feel weird. So that basically gives the writers, and well, really there are no writers, just the storyboard artists, because the show is very much visually told, very little dialogue. Fundamentally, the show is able to tell any kind of story. And while all of the stories that they do tell have a very distinct, like, stylistic sort of consistency, which is that very little dialogue, very stylized, very much visual storytelling. Those things are all consistent, but the actual kinds of stories they tell and the kinds of things that you see are wildly different.
I mean, as an example, there's, like, dragons in some episodes, zombies in others, spaceships in others, robots and cyborgs, and you don't bat an eye at any of that, because in the context of the wider world, they've built it so that it can basically do whatever.
And even then, there's the episode where Aku, because he's frustrated that all the children in the world don't love him, reads them fairy tales where he's the hero.
Who shall we thank for this heroic feat? The people asked. The warrior removed his helmet to reveal himself. It was none other than I, Aku. And so the people bowed down and made the great warrior their king. That is the story of how I came to be.
That's an episode. You can do that as well.
Or it's a gangster movie.
Aku!
Easy there, Jackie boy.
What? Where am I? What happened?
Can you believe this guy?
What happened, Jackie, is that we saved your life.
You what?
Well, you see, you lost your mind back there and started to duke it out with the big boss himself.
So, we nailed you over the head, man. Wham! Lights out, and here we are.
Yeah, we saved you before Aku had a chance to put you out of commission permanently.
I cannot believe this.
Or it's a gangster movie.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a gangster episode.
Or a noir film.
Lulu. Sweet thing. I miss her. I hate the rain. It makes me all sentimental. You're probably wondering what an old robot like myself is doing, having all these feelings. Well, I'll tell you. But we gotta go back, way back to the beginning.
Yeah, it's unbelievable the amount of variety that you get in Samurai Jack, even though it's all held together by this very beautiful art and this very interesting setting and interesting character. That's one of the things that makes it unique and why it never really fit in anywhere, because it really doesn't fit in with anything else in any specific way. It is very much a very unique show. And that's what everybody loved about it.
Joey mentioned earlier that the storyboard artist had a significant amount of control, but it doesn't really express exactly how much.
Yeah.
From what I know, the storyboard artist did all their work first. They drew out every shot in an episode without doing any writing whatsoever beyond this is the arc of the episode, or we're making it about something or other. And then later on, they would go back and fill in the blanks. That's basically the opposite of how any other cartoon was made. As far as I know, most of them come from script to storyboard rather than from storyboard to script. And that's another reason why Samurai Jack is kind of terse in its dialogue and a lot more visual storytelling rather than a very dialogue heavy show.
And like basically the way that the show worked, and you basically described it very well. It's Genndy would come to the storyboard artist. He would say, "I have this kernel of an idea. Okay, there's gonna be teams of 2 storyboard artists that work together. Gendy's going to give each of these teams kernels of an idea, and then they're going to just draw storyboards of that episode. And that's it. There's no writing. It's just they write it in the process of drawing the storyboards. So as a consequence, you have a very different style of storytelling than you ever saw, even in most film that we get today, or pretty much anything. Like, it's very classical, like 70s filmmaking style, which is what Genndy wanted to do, which is that the visuals tell the story. So the stories themselves usually end up being relatively simplistic. You know, there's not like, you can't tell us a ridiculously complex story without a lot of dialogue, but consequently, the images and the way that the story is told are much more visually interesting than you get in typical TV shows where, like, I always use Game of Thrones as an example, because that's a show where it's extremely complicated, but the vast majority of each episode, not counting like this like some individual set pieces, are like 2 people in a room talking to each other, because you just have to explain all that story. You know, there's no way to explain all that story in just visuals. You need to have people talking to each other. So that's like, you know, it's a give and take. Like, some people really like that and some people, you know, find that boring. But at the end of the day, like, there's different kinds of storytelling. The way Samurai Jack likes to operate is primarily just, these are the images you're seeing, and these images are telling you what's going on. So it's very in the moment. It's very like, you know, he sees something over there, and you have to like sort of tell what that thing is, and then he realizes something about it. It's all very internal, and that's what makes it so, I think, so gripping, because it basically everything is told through images and music. And when you get that kind of storytelling, I feel like there's nothing more powerful in terms of film, because film is like an audiovisual medium. It is not a book. Like, you're not reading dialogue, and it's not a play. It's specifically how you juxtapose moving images and that synchronized with sound. So what kind of stories can you tell in using just that, that's basically the essence of Samurai Jack.
It's also very, very. Oh man, I don't know if well animated is the correct way of putting this, but it's animated in a very effective way.
Yeah.
A lot of times they might loop a thing over and over in a way of kind of getting scale across to the viewer. So there's actually two that I can think of from the movie that we just saw. You see a lot of huge crowds of enemies coming across, and that might be like maybe 5 to 10 frames at best, but you play it over a bunch, and you get across the idea of there's like thousands of guys coming at him right now, thousands of bugs. Or you can cut the frame up. They did a lot of very interesting experimental kind of animation style. You leave like 2/3 of the frame black, and then you show Aku's like shapeless mass rise above on the left side, then in the middle, and then on the right, and it gets across like he's growing and growing, and it's so weird.
It's such an awesome
but it's
visual.
amazing.
This is another show that I would call like a triumph of a limited animation style, right? Like you have your Disney animation, which is a style of animation where there is no part of anything that is done cheaply or slowly, right? In other words, like every single movement is unique. Every single animation that you see is animated on ones, or in other words, like every single frame has a different picture, and every single character animates in a very lively way, and nothing is repeated, and everything is very expensive and takes forever. Obviously, Samurai Jack is not that, because it's a television animated show, and your kind of budget for something like that cannot allow you to do that kind of storytelling and that kind of animation. So what you get in Samurai Jack is instead very creative uses of a limited budget and limited time, and making the most out of that, which is why Samurai Jack's animation specifically is not necessarily what makes it so stark and beautiful. It's really the shot compositions and the way they tell the stories, which is...
And the fact that they don't really care about sticking to the frame as is.
Yeah.
Gendy's like, you want a widescreen shot? Go for it. And you just make the standard definition TV shot into a widescreen shot by cutting off the top and bottom of the frame. And it's amazing.
Yeah, you can switch your aspect ratio whenever you want. You know, it basically anything goes. But yeah, what makes it work so well is that the way that they compose their shots and the way that Genndy just chooses to edit his action is what makes it so compelling. It really is just like awesome to see something made on Cartoon Network in that time period that's that creatively put together. Because like I said, they didn't have a lot of money and they didn't have a lot of time. They're basically racing against time to put out something of extremely high quality. And they did put out something of extremely high quality.
And that's when, like, cartoons, and especially you see it nowadays in cartoons, where they use such a cheap style to make them, where it's just move the figure's body parts to as it goes.
Yeah, that's cutout animation.
Right, cutout animation. It's clearly redrawn all the time.
Samurai Jack is traditionally animated. It is not like it's not one of those cutout shows that you see today. Like it is like a traditional animated show. It just so happens that animation is like it's more anime influence in terms of like the level of animation than like a Disney animated movie.
Genndy Tartakovsky is probably like one of the most pure animators out there, because even, I mean, we were making fun of like the Hotel Transylvania movies, but those still look great.
Well, yeah, that's in terms of like the 3D CG world. Most people that know anything about animation will tell you that in the 3D CG world, those Hotel Transylvania movies actually have some of the most lifelike or like expressive animation that there is, just because for some reason in 3D they tend to like they hover towards realism in their animation, but Genndy's like, nah, that's not the heart of animation. The heart of animation is exaggeration and being able to like put your own personality into the way things move. So he would like stress to the animators and do that.
He actually used smears in the Popeye trailer that he made. He put a ton of effort into it and it got canned because nobody wants Popeye for some reason. He actually uses traditional 2D animation techniques like smears, which if you pause it in a freeze frame, you'd see like half of Popeye's arm just taking up most of the frame. And that's something that you only get out of 2D animation normally. But he decided, no, we're using it here because that is what looks better.
Yeah, that's just like, it's a way of putting personality into your animation, and that's just something that kind of got lost in the translation from 2D to 3D.
I think the sound design in Jack bears a lot of examination. Like, one of the first things you hear in the entire series is just this horrible like screech or like flash
noise.
and then like Aku's he just has this background noise
like
that's like this horrible ambient rumbling that's just terrifying and dark and miserable, and it's like, this is a kids show villain who's a cartoon like goofball, but he's got this horrifying background like noise, and it's amazing.
No, the sound design in Samurai Jack should not be understated. It's probably like especially in the world of like cartoons, it's probably the most meticulously sound designed show like ever. Like they pay so much attention to it, because really, like Genndy's like, yes, it's a visually told show. Genndy will be the first to tell you that it's like that and audio are what make it work. Like, he's very conscious of how the images really come alive when you have the audio very carefully timed and very carefully put in there, which is again why it's so compelling to watch. You just kind of watch it, and you just everything about the experience, the visual experience and the oral experience, it just overwhelms you.
It's hard to capture the tone of Samurai Jack. So it is an epic, but it's also hilarious too. Where the main villain, Aku, is also just the funniest character that you enjoy seeing just to see his antics.
He's both pure evil and hysterical. It's
the Western style doesn't negate the humor in it.
No, definitely not.
You look at Sergio Leone movies, and there's some really funny moments.
Sergio Leone's sense of humor is very like bawdy and like lowbrow too.
But that's why I say that this feels like a Western to me when I watch Samurai Jack. It feels like a modern day Man with No Name as animation.
Well, yeah, it's very clearly inspired by those things. Yeah,
I think they actually even use a lot of the same sound effects.
They use very similar
Westerns,
sound effects, definitely. Yeah.
To Samurai Jack. Like, maybe not quite the same, but it could be, because they draw from the same sound libraries for a lot of projects in like entertainment.
Oh, I'm sure.
But like a lot of those like sword clashes and a lot of the kind of emphasis sounds that they use are just so strikingly bold and upfront about it. It serves like such a nice like statement, like an exclamation point on any action happening in the show.
Why should you invest time in watching Samurai Jack as opposed to something else that's maybe not a cartoon, or maybe some other anime show, or maybe just other television that's out there? Like, what makes Samurai Jack a worthwhile investment to a modern day American viewing television audience?
So first off, you don't necessarily have to watch all of Samurai Jack. You can watch kind of like, I think Genndy calls them the A stories. There are like a set of episodes that are maybe like, there's probably like 10 to 20 episodes out of Samurai Jack that are like top tier.
Yeah, considered essential by all the fans and all of the creators.
Yes. There are some that you definitely have to watch, but then it's like good to watch some of the other ones as well, so you can kind of get a feel for the show in a more normal state. So like, if you went to Samurai Jack and immediately watched X49, is it?
It's just Tale of X9.
X9. If you started out there, you would be so confused.
Yes, you would.
And it wouldn't make any sense.
I feel like the show should be watched in season chronology, but you don't have to watch every episode if you don't want to.
Yeah.
And there's no penalty for doing that, because the episodes are not serialized. Like, if there's no real strong sense of continuity between every episode. Every once in a while, it's like a subtle callback. Every episode is completely standalone. As long as you understand the basic premise of the show, then you can watch any episode for the most part.
There are several A stories that do very interesting things in a storytelling sense, in an action sense. Like, for instance, there's an Assassins in a Cabin episode that a lot of people call like a Hateful Eight kind of thing. Where it's just a bunch of people sitting in a cabin talking about how much they hate Samurai Jack and how they're going to kill him. And it's just an episode, a little tiny episode focused on this group of people. Jack hardly even shows up. And it's just like, it's very, very interesting in an animation sense. because everybody gets their own style. Very interesting in a storytelling sense because our main character isn't the main character. And you feel bad for his enemies.
There's a lot of episodes in season 4 where Jack is not the main character, which is one of the things that makes it really interesting to watch it in chronology. Like, I feel like each season has its sort of own identity about what kinds of stories it's telling.
It's kind of cool because Jack, as a character, he's not a cipher like a stranger in a lot of westerns, like the guy who comes into town and solves the problem. But he does serve that role.
Yeah, he can be
like
that,
you know what he is as a character and what he's striving for, but at the same time he's still the mysterious stranger to most of the people in the world. It's a rare opportunity to get so many Western style stories in a single source, you know?
One very compelling framework. So my biggest contention about why you should watch Samurai Jack is that, one, it's unlike anything else that's out there. So if you're bored by your entertainment lately, which if you're anything like me, you're very bored by your entertainment lately because it all sucks except for Twin Peaks and Samurai Jack, then you should seek this out because it's a style of storytelling that I think has, I don't want to say gotten unpopular, but that people are not aware of, or that people have forgotten is a potential of film, because all of our film these days is very dialogue focused, it's either very cheap or very expensive, but it's all very dialogue focused and all very chaotic or very just kind of, I don't want to say boring, but very straight. There's very little invention going on in mainstream
There's no
film.
subversion in a lot of things in terms of a media angle, like actually trying to do something different.
Yeah. And of course, like, obviously there are things that are great. Like, there's great things everywhere. But my main point is that Samurai Jack is a very unique piece of popular art. And it's something that, one, it was not based on anything when it came out. It was a completely original idea. So that's check mark 1 for something really cool. 2, there's nothing else that's ever been made that's really quite like it, which is check mark number 3 or 2 or whatever. Then 3, even if, like, a lot of people feel like they don't want to watch cartoons because it's kids stuff, and that's just an American thing. Now, obviously, that's been changing as anime has been getting so much more popular lately, but the visuals are incredibly compelling and incredibly beautiful, and the artwork that all the artists put into it is really, really impressive and really deserves to be seen. And for the biggest thing is that this is a show that favors visual and oral storytelling, and as a result, it's very emotional and very beautiful to watch. And there's no points in this where you feel like you want to check your phone because you're bored, unless you're just not paying attention. And there's no parts in this where there's just dialogue happening and it just glazes over your head because you don't really give a shit. There's no stories in this that are like obviously there's formulaic stories, but everything is so uniquely told and so wonderfully like visualized, and the music is incredible. And like there's almost nothing else I can say. It's just such a incredible piece of work put together by artists at the top of their game, making this incredibly strange, unique property that for 4 seasons came and went, and then got this miraculous revival later on to finally finish it all off. And I can't think of very many things in pop culture that exist today that can be so widely loved. Like, I don't think Samurai Jack is really that hard to get into, and 2, so just artistically valuable. It's not a terrible J.J. Abrams revival that just feeds on your nostalgia and then you forget about it in a week. There's nothing like that. It's just very purely told stories in a very visually interesting way. And there's very, very little of that, I feel like, in mainstream entertainment today. I feel like mainstream entertainment has gotten to this point where everything is a rehash or a tired continuation of old ideas, things that everybody is already comfortable with, and very little invention. And Samurai Jack was constantly doing things in a different way and constantly showing you that it could be a different thing, even in and of itself. So it's just a beautiful piece of work. And there's really not much more I could say about why you should be watching it. Just like try to take any of your preconceived notions about what a cartoon is and just allow yourself to be wrapped into this world and these characters, and just see if you like it. You know, to me, it's one of the best possible realizations of what filmmaking can do and what animation can do, especially like animation on a limited budget.
Yes, I can hold. Yes, I would like to place an order for delivery. Aku. I think I'm in the computer. Yes, that's it. I'd like a large... What? Huh? Extra thick. 30 minutes, oh, it's free. Excellent!
Just an offhand note, I guess. Premiere movie was very cool because you didn't get to see Samurai Jack on the big screen before this. And I thought it was nice, and I thought it was very cool to see the first, like, HD remade episodes. Well, not remade, but remastered. I'm not positive I got too much more off of seeing a huge screen version of it, because it was still in the same
aspect ratio. Yeah, it's not. None of the show is widescreen. Yeah,
it was very cool though. It was nice to see it, but I felt like some of the episodes later on in the series are almost more interesting than the very beginning.
Oh no, they absolutely are.
Though the beginning is a very solid, nice start.
I think that the first episode of the premiere movie, so like the first 22 minutes or whatever it is like a masterpiece of just introducing a concept.
And as a tone and series setter, that first episode does a fantastic job of getting that across, because it's like a round the world trip told just through the pictures.
Yeah.
You know exactly what's going on at every single point.
And music, yeah.
Oh yeah. They shift the music as he travels through the continent.
And it's just a really good like melody. Like it's very everything about that opening is so awesome.
The premiere movie event, it doesn't like capture the hilarity of Samurai Jack as some of the later ones do, where some episodes you can't believe how funny it is. You can't believe that you're laughing as hard as you are at a show that you were just so fixated on an episode ago by how deep the story is of how these characters are just going through like such turmoil that Jack has to like save them from. And then the next episode is the main evil villain being just like a big goon who's just, ordering pizza.
Yeah. It's unbelievable.
It's something. It really is a special.
And they do a good job of like occasionally reminding you that Aku is a scary motherfucker.
No, Aku is pure evil, and there are some episodes where like you don't even see Aku, but you see what he's done, and you just go like, "Fuck, man! Like this is like he's so funny, but to so many people in history, he has caused so much destruction and despair, and the show doesn't make light of that." Like, the show, like, really makes you feel a lot of the very heavy emotions that are implied from its setting and its storytelling, but while still allowing the main villain to be a goofball and still allowing for episodes that completely shift the tone away from seriousness to very almost like ridiculous humor. And sometimes within the same episode, like sometimes you'll have something that's like incredibly dark and incredibly funny at the exact same time, and somehow your brain processes this and it works. It's just, I don't know if it's because of the way that the show is designed in terms of visuals and the way that they have sort of created this tone, but everything works in the show, regardless of what anybody tells you about everything needing to have a consistent tone and everything needing to be like very like consistent all the way through. It works varying these different kinds of feelings.
So do you want to, I guess we can go right into when the show was brought back.
The miraculous recovery.
16 years later, after the show had its first run, its first 4 seasons, which we were big fans of the whole way through. I remember where we were, actually, when we watched the last episode of season 4, Jack and the Baby.
I remember, too.
And then it was gone.
Yep.
The show just disappeared, and we were like, what happened? Why is the show gone? It was great. And it just wasn't getting the viewership. But it developed enough of a cult following. Like, reporters would always ask Genndy or fans, like, what's going to happen with Jack? And then they were going to make a movie, and like another guy you brought up earlier, J.J. Abrams was actually in talks with Genndy for a while, right? And then it actually got at least somewhat like far. Where I don't know if they got to actual like concept portions, but
Clearly it must have gotten some way through, because apparently a lot of those ideas were used.
All right, let me read you a quote from Genndy Tartakovsky about the times he tried to make a Samurai Jack movie. Okay. He cited many of the ways in which potential studio backers wanted him to update the show's largely wordless, expressionistic storytelling quality for a new set of expectations, right? This is from an article I read. They wanted a lot of story twists, more dialogue, maybe a sidekick or two. We had to watch how much action there was. They wanted more comedy. They didn't want the tone to be so dark. All things equal to nah. So in other words, Genndy was not going to sacrifice what made Samurai Jack work just to appease the people in studios that kept trying to fit it into a more specific box.
Yeah, and it's not even like they were going to do it to like make it a more marketable thing. Like to their minds it was, but I don't think it would have worked.
They were just trying to turn it into a kind of storytelling that Genndy had no interest in making, because he was trying to make this very visually told, very stylistic homage to different kinds of stories. Like, and he always brings up like 70s film, and I think Sergio Leone movies are a great example, and Kurosawa movies too, of that kind of storytelling. And so for him to be told by these studio people, like, so we know we love Samurai Jack, but we want you to make it completely different from what it was. Like he just decided, like he decided, that's not what I want to do. I want to make it the way that it deserves to be made. And eventually, he was sitting on the toilet one day. I honestly think this is what he said. And he thought, maybe I'll just shoot an email over to Cartoon Network and see if they want to do another season, just so I can finally do this. It's about time. And so he did that, and they were like, yeah, sure, let's do it. So they gave him full creative control and said, here you go. Here, get your people, make a 5th season and end the show. And that's exactly what they did.
And we're going to put it on Adult Swim, so if you want, you can get a little more mature. But this is, before I get into this is something that Genndy Tartakovsky has said before in interviews, where he's been asked straight up, like, what inspired you to want to make kid shows, and how do you know what kids like? And his answer to that was kind of like, I don't know what kids like, I just know what I like. So I make what I think is great, which is why it's so funny that any show by Genndy Tartakovsky, like Dexter's Lab or Samurai Jack, is just as enjoyable to me right now as it was when I was a kid.
Because it never had anything to do with making for kids.
He doesn't patronize kids.
I think they're more open-minded than adults give them credit for. Like Samurai Jack, like, apparently when Samurai Jack's like first episode was like in the initial work print was screened, like the one of the producers of Cartoon Network was like, it's a little slow, isn't it? And like, which made Gendy's heart sink, of course. It's like, no, but it's like awesome. Like, there's so much atmosphere and there's so much, it's so great. But then that producer showed it to his kid, and the kid was just like transfixed on the screen, like, holy shit, this is so epic, So it's like, kids can understand this kind of stuff.
"50 years have passed, but I do not age. How much longer can you keep this up? Time has lost its effect on me. Yet, the suffering continues.
You've forgotten your purpose!
This is not a nostalgia-based thing. No. This is its own unique story. It totally changes your even original interpretation of Samurai Jack by what you get now. So, here's what happens. So the Samurai Jack character that we know, he's the wanderer. He kind of goes across the planet, just helping different groups that are oppressed by Aku.
Seeking a way back in time to undo the evil that Aku had done.
So that never happened in the original series.
He never actually was able to defeat Aku and go back to the past.
In the new series, it's 50 years later, and he still hasn't been able to find a way to get back to the past. Mm-hmm. In fact, we find out that all of the ways to get back to the past, all the time portals, have been snuffed out by Aku and destroyed.
He is trapped.
He can't get back now.
And also, just to add to that, he because of, like, it's explained away as a side effect of the initial time travel, he does not age. So he is still fundamentally the same age that he was 50 years prior. And so he's in infinite purgatory, basically, in this hell of a future.
Aku can't kill him because he has the sword. So Jack can't die, and Aku can't win.
Yeah.
So they're just stuck in a stalemate for 50 years straight, and both of them are completely miserable at the start of the series.
Yeah.
And where we see Jack is he's still helping people. He's still trying to do whatever he can to help anybody comes in his path. And he's now like a mythic figure because it's been 50 years now. People know who Jack is, and if they see him, they know he's here to help us. He can help us. But Jack is now tormented by another figure of himself that believes that he's failed, that he's failed his family back in the past. He's failed everyone through the years that has been oppressed by Aku, because it was his destiny, his purpose to defeat Aku back in his own time. So he's tormented by himself.
His feelings of failure.
Going to the point of wanting to just
commit ritualistic suicide.
Yes, which it's hard to believe, but that's where the show goes.
That's where season 5 essentially starts out, right? Now, you might be thinking, that's pretty heavy stuff. And it is. But Samurai Jack never shied away from that kind of storytelling, right? Now, obviously, it never got that overt, because that's more of an adult sort of theme and more Adult Swim territory than Cartoon Network. But Samurai Jack fundamentally was always a show about a man who was torn from his home and repeatedly failed to get back. And Genndy has said, like, his one tragic flaw is that he could never do something significant only for himself. He had to save the people that were helping him, or he had to always be honorable in a situation. So even in any opportunity where he could have gone back to the past, he would prevent himself from doing it if it meant that other lives would be at stake and that kind of thing. So no matter what, there are so many times in the show where you see Jack get almost like ridiculously angry at his failures, or Jack just be in despair for his failures. And some episodes end on that note. Like there's many episodes that end on Jack failing after trying really hard to do something. And the episodes don't end with like this feeling of like triumph. They don't end with it just ends with him going on and trying again, but with the knowledge that he has failed yet again, right? And that's partially because the show was not serialized, right? So they weren't able to tell a story where the show ended. But the consequence of that is that the structure of the show made it so that Jack's entire journey was an existential nightmare. And but
he never gets to win ever.
So that making that sort of subtext more text, especially for a audience that grew up with the show, so obviously they're a little bit more mature themselves. And well, basically it's just that, just for this audience that now has been waiting for this conclusion for so long, to make that more overt and as an actual aspect of the story is exactly what the show needed, because it doesn't betray what the show is about, but it also allows it to go to much more interesting and serious territory, which is what we all wanted from it.
The major difference, other than the fact that the story is darker and the themes are definitely more heavy, the episodes do build on each other.
Yes.
Like season 5 is serialized.
Yes. It was essentially conceived as one season-long movie to end the show.
The other thing that's new about season 5 is while the art style is the same, it's revamped and revitalized.
Essentially, what the new season looks like is, and again, this is one of the things I love so much about Samurai Jack. This is a show made by artists who are working in their own way, right? So Genndy has said, like, the show, it still looks like Samurai Jack, but now the kind of artist I am, I'm not going to draw it the same way because that's just not who I am anymore. I'm going to draw it a little bit differently. We're going to make him look a little different because we feel it's different for the show. It's more right for the show. So it has the same aesthetic style, but it's updated to fit the sensibilities of the artists that are making it. It isn't them trying to just recapture the magic, because that would be against what any artist should be doing. It's instead them trying to do something that is true to themselves, but also true to this world they created in the past. And that's one of the reasons why it works so well. It's not like the show used to be. And like, I'm not going to say that's a bad thing, because I'm not a big fan of serialized television shows that last for like 7 seasons and then end terribly because the show people had no idea what they were doing from the beginning, and then it's so many plot threads, they don't know how to wrap it up, and it's just a disaster in the end. But when you take one season and you say, we're just going to tell one story for this entire season, then you end up with the ability to sort of just tell a contained, logical story. And that's what they did with season 5.
My final evaluation, Samurai Jack, the original and season 5, it's 5 gourmet burgers that are medium rare, because that's how I like it. I like it medium
whatever
rare.
you like.
Perfectly cooked. The bun is like just
Immaculate.
crispy enough. Also, they put it on the grill a little bit,
Nice and toasted.
just so
Just the perfect amount of toasted.
it's just perfect.
For me, it's all the best burgers in the world. That's it.
For me, it's an Aku brand burger
Eat Aku Cola, baby.
and an Aku brand beverage.
Oh my god, those fucking billboards get me every time. Aku eating like a fucking sub.
He's like the salesman for
I feel
everything
like once
in the world.
when you see that image, that's when you know what Samurai Jack is. Jack gets flung into the past, and then like Aku has always controlled the world, and it's like a billboard of him eating a fucking sub.
Yeah, the first thing you see is your mortal enemy eating a burger.
Oh god, I love Samurai Jack so much.
Now let's talk about the controversial ending to season 5 and kind of like the way they take the show.
Spoilers ahead.
Spoilers. Spoilers.
We didn't want to get into it before when we first were talking about season 5, just because it's, you should, if you have any interest in Samurai Jack, if you watch the original, you should really take the time. It's 10 episodes, they're 20 minutes. Watch them all.
And please, give it your full attention. I beg of you. Put your phone away and just sit in a darkened room.
Don't deprive
If you have a
yourself.
home theater, watch it there. If you only have a computer screen, that's fine. But turn out the lights. Don't do anything else. Just give it your full attention and let yourself be taken into the world.
The main arc of this continuation that we've gotten is Jack alone, and then Jack with Ashi. With the turning point being Jack in the graveyard about to commit seppuku.
Which is suicide.
Yes. In vast term, or like in a overall term, the beginning half of the season is kind of dark and miserable.
Yeah.
And then the second half is more hopeful.
Yes.
And in some ways, I think the second half could have been developed a little bit more, but overall, it is very good.
The way that this show is set up, like Mark said, we have these first episodes where Jack is by himself. He's hunted by the daughters of Aku, and then the last daughter of Aku that we see is Ashi, and they end up being this sort of unlikely pair of one who wants to kill Jack and Jack who wants to, kill Aku. And then Jack eventually teaches her that Aku is the evil, and she sort of comes around and realizes that Jack is the hero, right? And they start working together on this mission to destroy Aku. Now, Ashi becomes a love interest for Jack and sort of like this sidekick character, which is funny because like in the original run of the show, like Genndy was always talking about, we're never going to give him a sidekick, that'd be terrible. And then ironically, he's like, well, I guess we did sort of give him a sidekick, but in our own way, So the basic fundamental things that Genndy wanted to do with this series was he wanted to take the show in a more mature direction, but not in the sense of gore and blood and violence, but in the sense of more adult thematic material that an adult audience would be able to resonate with, which includes those feelings of existential despair and those feelings of falling in love, which is what the second half of the season deals with more so than the first, which is more of the existential despair. So we have this love interest character, Ashi, and Jack together, and their relationship sort of builds over the course of these episodes. And a lot of the audience at the time wasn't really feeling it. I don't think that I'm not going to say that everybody wasn't feeling it. There's two contingencies here. People that were really into the love story and people that really weren't into it and didn't feel like that was the correct story. that was being told. And that's where the problems I started to have with the greater Samurai Jack fan base started to come into play, where people felt very entitled to a certain kind of storyline that they wanted to see happen. So there was a lot of debate on the internet about whether or not this love interest story was good. But I think it comes from a place of, ironically, a place of immaturity compared to what they were trying to do.
He was hoping
like
for.
They were going for,
Yeah.
We got adults watching this show, so surely adults could relate or appreciate a love story, right? And Genndy wanted to tell that kind of story because he loves love stories. He's really into that, and he thought that there was a place for that in animation and in Samurai Jack. So ironically, then you get all these people that are saying like, "Well, Samurai Jack, this is stupid. It has a love story." It's like maybe the producers insisted that there be one or something. I don't get it. And it's almost like mind-bogglingly immature to assume that that's why. No, it's in there because that's an aspect of life that Genndy wanted to explore, right?
I think one of the main concerns I had was like, this is the first time he's fallen in love in whatever amount of time, 50 years. But it's like, one, he's horribly depressed. Two, you could buy that he didn't kill anybody if that was human in 50 years, but him not falling in love for 50 years is somehow out of the question.
Yeah, right.
So it's like,
although like
you're already kind of suspending your disbelief.
The original series
here,
does have like moments of Jack having like sort of a love interest.
Jack was a really young kid when he was taken, and everything about his life was in preparation and training to defeat Aku.
Yeah.
He doesn't know anything about this.
No, nothing at all.
And he comes at this as such like an innocent way, even though he's been the same age for 50 years. So he's around like, what would we say, like a 25-year-old guy, and he's been that for 50 years. And he's never really like progressed or matured past that point of just being the same at the same state that he was always in. So he's kind of like, even though he's been around for so long, he's almost maturing and having more feelings that we see in this new season. And I think the love interest was a great way to do it.
Ashi's storyline also mirrors his in a really good way. Just like Jack, she had an upbringing that was specifically to kill this specific thing, right? And everything about her childhood was geared towards killing Jack, just like everything about Jack's entire life up to that point was about killing Aku. So neither of them know anything about falling in love or being like that. But obviously them spending so much time together, they like each other, and it's completely natural that they would. And it ends up being like a very moving storyline, especially like, going into the ending.
Yes. So now you want to go right to the ending.
Well, sure, we can go into the ending. So the final episode of Samurai Jack has been very controversial, with lots of people not sure how they feel about it, lots of people very much hating it, lots of people very much liking it, some people a little bit on the fence. It defines divisive, which I think in some ways is a good thing. I'm glad that it's divisive instead of just sort of meh, like, I don't know, like whatever. It was okay. I'm glad that there are differing opinions about it, but the way that the show ends is definitely not what people were expecting it to be. I mean, the basic gist of the ending, obviously, and just to recap, is that contained in one 30-minute episode, essentially a war against Aku, led by all of the people in the world that Jack has saved or helped. Aku has imprisoned Jack using Ashi, who is like technically his daughter, like mind controlling her basically. And the series ends with Ashi, who realizes she has Aku's powers, creating a time portal to send Jack and her back to the past so that Jack can return and kill Aku, which he does. And following that, Jack and Ashi, they plan this like great wedding. It's going to be beautiful. And of course, as everybody knows, the infamous scene now where Ashi tells Jack, I never would have existed had Aku had Aku died. And she disappears in Jack's arms on their wedding day. Horrifying, depressing, everybody's really sad. And the show ends with this sort of moment that Jack has that sort of calls back to moments that he had with Ashi and him sort of smiling and like remembering the times that he had with her and his entire time in the future, for that matter. It ends on a dour, very bittersweet note, and the way it's done it has been controversial to a lot of people, to say the least.
Yeah, so I think I do fall on a like toss-up side for the ending. Because there's a few things that aren't really made clear, like, does Jack recognize that the future would be erased by going back to kill a coup? You don't really get a sense for that on the beforehand, but I suppose he doesn't?
Or the sense that doesn't necessarily matter either to him or to the people in the future.
Yeah, but they don't really give us an indication that he's thought about that, you know? Like, it doesn't seem like he's ruminating on the fact that everyone he's known for basically the whole series no longer exists at the very end. But maybe, I guess, like,
I feel like it's encapsulated a lot through Ashi specifically, even though
like that's kind of the thing, but I don't know if they had time to really get that idea across.
Well, I think whether or not that idea needs to come across is up for debate. The point being that is one episode that contains a lot of information in a very short amount of time.
That's my main problem, I think. The way Samurai Jack is usually, if you put the exact same episode on slow motion, it would at least be a significant amount better to me, I think, because a lot of these very poignant moments are played very fast, which is different from how Samurai Jack usually operates, which kind of indicated to me that they might have not had the time they wanted to actually do the ending. Like, I think this was the ending they wanted, but I don't think they got the full runtime they wanted for it.
I can't speculate about like whether or not
hard
there
to
were
say,
producer
obviously.
things, or like, you know, they said they could only have 10 minutes for the finale, or 30 minutes for the finale or whatever. You can't really speculate about that. It's really hard to tell.
To some degree, maybe.
It could have just been a case where they thought that would have worked in one episode, and some people think it does and some people think it doesn't.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it is what it is, you know, and I think that I don't feel like there were any situations in this run of the show where the creators did not have more or less complete control over what they were doing. They did it the way they wanted to do it.
But I also think they were building within this 10-episode framework that they had. So I'm not sure. To me, it seemed like they may have overestimated how much material they could fit into that.
That's possible. That's definitely possible.
Because I think especially the returning to the past portion felt like it was played very fast.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, so I agree with you, Mark. While I like the story, I like the way they ended it, I think my only gripe would be that the last episode should have been longer because it's such a slow build to, like, in a good way, through the first 9 to get you to the point that they're at the last episode. That it feels it moves so much faster than the pacing of the rest of the series, which I really enjoyed. The way it moved, the way we saw like the internal struggle that he was having, the way all this was happening.
I think that's also part of it, because it does feel like a takeoff from the rest of even season 5, where you see a lot of Jack's internal struggle, but he doesn't really have any of that. Obviously, he defeats it in some way, but past that point, he's kind of just a man on a mission again. And it would have been a little bit nice to see him at least acknowledge the fact that the whole future is gone.
I think that's something that the creators even didn't think was important. You know, like,
okay.
To me, I think that's the kind of thing that a lot of us were thinking, right? A lot of us probably were thinking, you know, it would make a lot of sense for there to be some trepidation about going back to the past, because that would imply that the future is erased, or then it would get into time travel shit, or is there?
That is definitely not something I wanted out of Samurai Jack.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and I think the general point of the ending was not so much what happened to the future. What they were going for was more this sense of loss that Jack is pretty much eternally bound to having. And
I guess, but the issue is that they confirm first. They actually did confirm that the future was erased by erasing Ashi.
Yes,
and then they don't do anything with him beyond, like, they didn't have. It didn't seem like they had enough time for him to have some form of realization, because clearly he must have. because Ashi is gone.
But I mean, to me, it's like whether or not he acknowledges that doesn't specifically matter because we know that it's true. And I think that for Jack, like, so much about Jack is left unsaid in general. And I feel like it's okay that we don't know specifically what he's thinking in that moment when Ashi disappears, because the weight of it is something that we're able to comprehend.
Okay,
right?
I think most of it is this would have felt a lot more poignant if they gave that scene like a minute to play out.
Sure,
rather than,
and I think like that.
I think it gets about
example,
20. Yeah. It felt like it got about 10 seconds in the show, which is why it was off to me, I think.
No, it definitely, like, it plays very quickly. It's an episode that plays very quickly because, and every moment goes by much more quickly than we're used to seeing in Samurai Jack. Which is not to say that the filmmaking style is any different, but the pace is very different because it felt like they had to do a lot of things in one smaller time span. Now, whether or not that is a complete disaster, I'm not 100%
I don't think it's a
sold on.
disaster.
I think, like, I think the episode, especially on a second watch, now knowing what happens, I felt I was able to take in the moment a lot more clearly, right?
Okay.
When you first watch it, it's like, wow, that it's over. And then you're like, so much stuff happened so quickly, your brain can't even process what happened, right? You're just left like, well, oh, okay. Well, how about that, right? But then, I at least me personally, when I was able to go back and watch it again, I got this sense that it actually did feel like it worked. And again, like, that's not something that you should have to do necessarily. But again, these episodes are not particularly long, so it's not like it's a pain in the ass to do it, right? And I was very moved by the ending. It's just that it happened so quickly, it doesn't really give you time to be moved.
I think that was it.
I think
that's
that
the exact feeling that I had watching
and I
it
think
the
that's
first
probably
time.
the biggest issue with it. But to me, that's a complaint that is, it's the kind of thing that's more like, well, everything that they wanted to do, they did. There was an aspect of this that we feel like maybe it could have been longer, maybe it could have been like done a little bit more elegantly, but it's still a work created by artists doing something that they want to do, right? And there's nothing about that doesn't work. It's just maybe the formal choices they made in the final episode could have been done more optimally, or however you want to put it. But there's a large contingent of fans that feel like it was a betrayal, that the finale was a complete disaster, and
I just
that
want to be
everything
clear
was
that
awful about it.
Yeah, I don't dislike it. I only think that it could have been done marginally. Well, not maybe marginally, but I think it could have been done slightly better by basically a small tweak. Like, every single scene paced out to twice its length would have been basically what I was looking for out of it.
Yeah,
so
it
to
really
me,
is
it
that
felt
simple.
more like a missed opportunity to finish it completely in a small way, but it's still very good as it stands.
Yeah, and that's pretty much how I feel about it. And I think that any complaints about what happened being disappointing or being, I read one ridiculous comment that was like, oh, I'm a person that studies a lot about storytelling, right? And this was a very, like, badly constructed story. And I'm just like, who are you, random person on Reddit, like, that is the authority on storytelling and can tell us that this is not a good story? Like, that's completely ridiculous. So, like, there's so many people that feel like, and this is just true of, I feel like, just our generation of people watching stuff, that I don't want to say it's a sense of entitlement, but they have this sense that they are smarter than the entertainment that they watch, and that everything that they're watching, they know what's right for it. They know what it should have been. They're the experts, right?
Then again,
that's the thing. Like, there's criticism, right? There's criticism where you're just talking about what you liked and what you didn't like and what you thought about it, right? And that's very honest to me. But then there's the people that are like the self-proclaimed experts that think that something that was a disaster, that was just like something that was very clearly not a disaster, was as bad as they could make it to be, just because they think that in their minds they know what it should have been. That I'm against. I don't think that makes any sense. I think that you should let, especially something like Samurai Jack, which is the definition of artists making something they want to make for an audience of people that they want to please and please themselves first and foremost. It's like a genuine artistic work, right? It's not a sequel that has so many like variables that the studios insist has to be a certain way. Like, it's not that kind of thing where it's like art with an asterisk. It's like very purely an artistic statement by these people, right? So you can criticize it for things that you don't think worked very well, but you can't criticize it for not being the story that you thought it should be, because that is just not valuable. Like, your opinion on what their story is and how their story should have gone is like that's fine if you have it, but if you think you could do a better job, then do it yourself. Like, if that's not the story you wanted to see, then go ahead and make the story you want to see, because that's what they did. You know, they made the story they wanted to see.
And legitimately, on some level, you could, at a bare fucking minimum, you could write a script. There's no way you don't have the capability to write a script of something that you think would be better, and there's no reason that couldn't be readapted into something that's more close to your own vision.
Yeah, exactly.
So, seriously, make
you need
something.
to stop treating entertainment like your personal worldview expressed by other people. You know, and I feel like there's a large contingent of people that do that these days. Like, the fanboy culture is almost entirely predicated on that, and whether or not people get certain stories right or if they get it wrong. And that is just a complete disaster and complete nonsense and completely anti-art in every aspect. So please never be that person. Like, watch everything with an open mind, especially if it's something that is created by people, an original idea especially. And if the story is a way that you don't think it should have been, right? If you don't think that the story they should have told is the story that they did tell, then go ahead and make one yourself. You know, I'll just say this. Samurai Jack is a very rare, in this day and age, victory of art being made by people making it the way they want to make it for a mass audience. That's how it used to be. That's how things used to get made. But it doesn't happen that way much anymore. Now
it's made by a conglomerate that wants you to...
They want you to buy your Deckard and Kay Funko Pop figures.
Ouch.
You know, like,
well, isn't that what one thing they said about Samurai Jack that wasn't... Or no, the other Genndy show that didn't do well was...
Symbionic
Titan.
Symbionic Titan. The show was actually pretty good.
Enough. Yeah,
but they couldn't sell toys for it, so the show didn't make it.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's the state of, you know,
wow, what a happy note
in America.
Wow, I think we got darker after.
But that's the point. Like, I feel like Samurai Jack is great. Like, there's no doubt about it. Every season of Samurai Jack is very, very wonderful and beautiful filmmaking, beautiful music. Everything about it is fantastic, and we've already gushed about it enough. But more so than that, it represents something that we don't see very often in America, which is what I said. It's this very pure animation, artistic statement by people making it specifically the way that they want to make it. It is genuine pop art. It's not pop art created by a focus group in a boardroom to be as mass produced and appeal to as most people as possible, and consequently being very boring and terrible. It is a couple of guys who were very passionate about a story they wanted to tell and had the skills to tell it in the way that they wanted to do so. That's all it is. And that is awesome. That is exactly what our entertainment should be and always should be. Support that in any way that you can, because it's a wonderful thing when it actually does come together and we can sit here and say, wow, that actually happened. We're actually getting this.
I think the best way to end this now, Genndy Tartakovsky, we are gladly waiting your next work, whatever it may be, as long as it is
your
not
next Hotel Transylvania movie.
As long as it is not Hotel Transylvania.
Oh, jeez.
It's gonna be Hotel Transylvania.
Unfortunately, it'll be Hotel Transylvania.
Let me just add this aside, just this reminder that in an interview, when the interviewer asked him, so Genndy, these Hotel Transylvania movies, like, do these represent, like, your own, like, real personal stamp? Like, this is your directorial vision, and this is, like, kind of story you want to tell? And he just flat out said no.